Moving the needle on founder failure, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Lucas Poles, and welcome to Startup 2.0 by Spark XYZ. Join us each week as we give you access to some of the top investors and entrepreneurs around the country to help you think through and overcome some of the top challenges that startups face.
I think there's no better place in the country to be investing than Los Angeles.
What is the problem that you're solving and for who? Like, what is that specific pain point?
Sometimes when a company is not listening to its customers and just thinks it knows better than its customers, has a really, really hard time finding product market fit.
I want to see somebody that isn't going to stop. You know, this person, you just feel like they're gonna make it work.
A big heartfelt thank you to Brex, who without their support, this show would not be possible. We've seen firsthand the difficulties accessing basic corporate credit without providing a security deposit or personal guarantee early on. As companies grow, managing expenses has become more difficult and time consuming, which is why we've partnered with Brex to offer a corporate credit card that is not personally guaranteed, offers higher credit limits, provides auto reconciliation, and integrates with ERPs using receipt capture. Brex is the credit card of the startup ecosystem, and we highly encourage you to check them out.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lucas. Good to be here.
Appreciate you coming on. A little COVID-19 special edition
Yes.
Zoom. So definitely appreciate you taking the time. I know that you're busy with classes ending in the next week at SC, the alma mater, and so definitely appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll dive right in. So first, where we really like to start is like to find out more about just kind of your background. I know you have a very fascinating one. Myself, having been in the USC Incubator, and so want to dive into that a little bit, and then we'll run into some of the COVID stuff because I know that's top of mind for everyone, and then we'll talk about more VC stuff. Cool.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Sounds good. So a little about me. I'll just kind of give like a high-level chronological breakthrough of things that I've done.
Sure.
First part of my career was kind of corporate. Always worked in tech in one way or the other, in business development, product development, but worked in telecom, for a while when it was going from the old legacy systems to voice over IP.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a lot of work in that era, like a little before Skype was around, internationally, and went back to school. So did an MBA, and then worked in management consulting, like in tech strategy, for about 5 years. And at that point, started a startup in New York, which I ran for a couple of years. And it was really in that process of like figuring things out or not figuring things out, and seeing a lot of other friends kind of, maneuver, got interested in how founders just go through that process of, what should I be building? Like, who's the customer? That type of thing. Started running a roundtable series in New York around 2011, 2012, and discovered I really liked working with founders. So I did this a number of times, and I was looking for a way to make it into something bigger. And so I had the idea that I would want to like join a startup accelerator, like join the team of an existing one, or even start a new one. And New York in 2011, 2012, New York already had about 10 accelerator programs, and I didn't think it made sense to try to start the 11th one. So I was actually looking for a new market to go to. And earlier in my career, I had worked in Hong Kong for a while. And so I actually thought back to exploring Hong Kong as a location. So took a scouting trip, connected with as many people as I could over a couple of weeks, kept the discussions going when I went back to New York. And out of that process, which was probably about 6 months, I kind of gradually stepped into what was first like a startup boot camp program, and then what became a funded startup accelerator. So ended up starting the first funded accelerator in Hong Kong. I ran that for a year before moving to LA for family reasons. After I got here, I ended up at USC. So that's where we met. So I teach in the entrepreneurship center. I run the incubator program on campus. Do a couple of other things. And then, yeah, along the way, I've gotten involved in other accelerator programs, and just ended up meeting a lot of people and working with a lot of startups.
No, super fascinating background. So definitely want to, before we get into everything else, kind of want to dive into a little bit of the differences between the Hong Kong and the US market. Like, we're startups, because I know that there are definitely a lot of international startups that end up watching Startup 2.0. And so I want to kind of just dive in that, like, was your advice different for the Hong Kong startups? Did they have to take different avenues than the US one did? We can start diving into it.
So that is a question that I don't know. I feel like I've been thinking about and talking to people about for a while. So I guess my background was not really one of working in major tech hubs. Mm-hmm. So even when I was in New York, it was 10 years ago, right? 8 years ago, it was not the New York of startups of today. Much smaller market. And then I had a lot of experience, in Hong Kong. I ran a program in Rome also, and I just ended up getting to know people in like smaller tech locations. So to your question, like my recommendations are very different for founders in those locations. So like high level, what I found when I was in Hong Kong, for example, and even when I would talk to people in other locations, is what I found is a lot of the, I think, just like underlying bias is thinking of building a company as though you were in a major tech hub, in the Valley, or something, Silicon Valley. When some of the advice that would work in a location like that really does not work if you're in a smaller location where, there's no investment community, or a very small one. And they are like really risk averse, for example. Talent is very different locally. The platforms that you use might be totally different as well. The problems that are local or regional might be really different. So I ended up recommending that people first start to build for their local realities, local regional realities. Rather than thinking, oh, okay, I should just copy whatever the the tech kind of media, headlines seem to recommend, me doing for, building my startup. So in the situation when I was working in Hong Kong, now things have changed, a bit, but when I was there, Hong Kong's a big city, it's a wealthy city, very small investment community. Like I knew every single investor in Hong Kong, and it was a very small group. To be honest, like the people who in Los Angeles or in the Bay Area or New York, Boston, like the people or the profile of somebody who would be like an angel investor, in those locations. Mm-hmm. In Hong Kong, you are buying real estate. You're investing in just the financial markets. You're investing in manufacturing facilities in China. So very different type of background, and more risk averse. In fact, if anything, it was explained to me by one of the investors there, who said, like a lot of my friends say I'm crazy for investing in these companies because I could just buy a building and it's like a guarantee money coming back in, and instead I'm going to have 10 of these investments, and 9 of them, or maybe all 10, will not pan out, and it looks a little like I'm a little like silly. So I get it, and that was kind of like the cycle that impacts how many people go into trying to build their own thing, or the types of things they build. And the two stories that I had from like the early days when I was in Hong Kong. One was I had a team of 2 computer science master's grads. They had just graduated, and they were going to join this boot camp that I was running for the first time before I did the accelerator. Mm-hmm. Last minute, they back out. And the reason is their parents made them get real jobs, made them get like, a corporate job, right? And if you're living at home, as a lot of people would in Hong Kong. Your parents have a lot of influence on what you do with your time. So they said, no, you're not working on this little hobby. You're actually going to get a real job. And I want a logo that I recognize on the business card, that kind of thing. And then the other funny thing that was explained to me by another person who was actually in the first boot camp that I ran in Hong Kong. So this is 2012. So he said to me, if we were out, meeting, a romantic interest, if we're out, like, at a bar or a club, and somebody asks you, like, oh, so what do you do? And if you respond and say, like, oh, I'm working on a startup, what is heard is, oh, okay, so this person has no prospects. He couldn't find a real job. He probably has no money. Not so great. Whereas here in LA, it's, oh, exciting. Oh, me too. I'm also working on something. Or like, oh, I'm planning to do this. So it was a very different kind of like social pressure. It makes sense why there's a much smaller, tech community in, Hong Kong's a big city.
Yeah.
So, when I ended up talking to people in different parts of the world, and even much smaller tech locations than Hong Kong back then, I would see that kind of mix. Like everyone would, or a lot of people would still look towards the typical advice that might work in a big tech hub in the US.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really fit with your local set of problems, customers, talent pool, and investor community. So as a result, my go-to response was more about understanding how you could actually build something that is sustainable locally, how you could think first about bootstrapping, because the probability that you're going to raise money is probably even lower than it is in the US. I mean, it's low in the US already. Yeah. It's like even much lower in these other locations. So instead, how could you just maximize the opportunity, the chance that you have of success? Don't think that it's just magically going to work out as a like quintessential cover of a tech publication in the US. It explains. Yeah.
Cool. No, that's awesome. Yeah. So great, super interesting understanding of the kind of differences. Did you ever focus on? So you talked a lot about bootstrapping there. Did you ever focus on trying to have them transfer to the U.S. market or into a different country to either get new customers or new sources of funding?
Wasn't a focus of mine, but that certainly was a path that some people took. Mm-hmm. Like a couple of the larger companies, even back at that time, the pathway was basically build a little something that's working locally, and it seems to also have some international application. So if you are in a small tech hub, mm-hmm. you're probably starting to think internationally relatively soon, because your local market eventually becomes too small. Yeah. It's not like you could build just for the US market or just for the China market, and that's like big enough, right? Yeah. But not the case in a lot of the smaller locations. So some of those founders they'd get to some point, then they'd take a trip over to often the Bay Area, spend time there, and raise and like maybe even relocate at least part of the team. So I knew a number of people who took that type of a path.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Cool. So let's switch gears a little bit. So you run the USC Incubator now. I want to dive a little bit more into it. I want to find out kind of like why how a university incubator might differ from one within the actual startup ecosystem. Are there differences? Are there not? How's it run generally? Just kind of the whole shebang.
Yeah. Sure. So I didn't come from working in a university environment before I started working in a university environment. So this was new to me as well. But I would describe the differences between a university program and a privately run program as, so a couple of things. The program is there really as a benefit to students, alumni, faculty, and staff. So as a result, that means a couple of things are a little different. The first thing is the only restriction I have on the potential applicants I look at into the program is at least one founder must have some tie back to the university.
Cool.
Student, faculty, staff, alumni. In our case, it is a little more than half alumni, founders, maybe about 40+% or students, and then another small percentage that are faculty and staff. That's if you are in a big university, you do have a big pool of students and alumni, of course, but it's certainly restricted. It's not like the world. Like I used to look at applicants from like anywhere. When I was doing the program in Hong Kong or the program in Rome, in a university program, most of the time, you need some affiliation with the university. The other difference, which is in the case of the program I run, and in I'd say most university programs, we're not writing you a check, in day one, here it is, and we're also, for that matter, we're not taking like equity stakes in these companies. So as a result, we're really looking for the same kind of good things to happen, but I'm a little, I'm not as narrowly focused on startups that have a path towards being like massive, right? So I will also look at companies that they might never be applicable to a VC or to a funded accelerator program because the interpretation of the potential market size is too small, where it's not a VC backable company, but it still might be a solid business. It still might be a business that supports a team of people, a company that can support itself even just through revenue. So it's a little more of a broad mix of companies because we have everything from the VC backable, highly scalable startup to low tech consumer products that are more linear in how they grow. And then the other difference, I'd say, and this is where some university programs have more of a focus. Ours is, again, pretty broad in this sense. There's no one focus on industry. We've had everything from machine learning, SaaS, robotics, to food and beverage products, low tech consumer products, apparel even. So it's a very broad range, which can be a challenge.
Yeah.
But it's also fun just to see, okay, what are the things that are, that people are working on, that are out there. And it kind of keeps a very dynamic, mix of founder types, business types.
No, super interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. So a topic that I'm sure that a lot of the founders in the incubator are asking you right now is the current situation, why we are on Zoom and not hanging out in person. So wanted to find out, like, how is COVID-19 affecting the portfolio companies in the incubator?
So it's actually been a real mix. I can't say it's all in one direction or another because some are benefiting, some are not. And it's not, necessarily industry specific because, if you look even within, say, like the restaurant or food industries, like, some parts of those industries are actually benefiting. Like if you're on the delivery side, some are really hurting if you are a traditional kind of sit down restaurant. So the same type of thing that we've seen. What I would say generally is so the mix of companies that we have in the incubator, in general, they're pretty early stage.
Okay.
It's not uncommon for them to have raised like a little bit of, say, like a little bit of pre-seed, kind of funding, but they're early enough that it wasn't like they were dependent upon being able to raise money very soon.
Yeah.
For the most part. So given that, in general, generally speaking, like the burn rate is really low. they're able to sustain themselves. They're maybe seeking ways to, just to bootstrap themselves. And in a number of cases, I've actually seen, or you don't have, on the other hand, you don't have like an investor who is like saying like, I need you to meet like, this next target, and now you're in trouble.
Yeah.
So so there's been some that are doing well, some that are doing poorly. Even I'll even say, because kind of in this time, thinking of some of the more basic or traditional businesses is sometimes what I go to, or people go to first. So back to the discussion of food, we've had a number of food and beverage companies in the incubator. They sell in Whole Foods. They, some have like real retail.
Yeah.
Maybe something like 8 or 10% of the companies kind of fit that. And the funny thing has been, or the interesting thing has been, I had one who I caught up with last week who told me sales are going up. Everyone's cooking at home. And so they're buying our things and they're just like, getting it delivered, and, our sales are increasing. I also had another one that had the opposite, had much more of a, they sell to corporates, primarily for events. It's like a specialty kind of dessert. And that's been really hard hit. And so they've had to reconfigure how they are reaching customers, go direct to customer for the first time. They hadn't been doing that before. So I take it as, it's a little individual. Same on, like I have one machine learning company that for the most part sells to e-commerce platforms, and it helps them identify and categorize all the different products, like the thousands of products that are in their catalog. So there again, you have additional e-commerce spending, that could be a benefit. And all of a sudden now, like, if I can get like better sell through if I'm using your tech to categorize and present the best products to my customers. So it's a little bit of a mix, I'd say, in the companies that we have in the program.
Interesting. So, well, let's dive a little bit into that then. So maybe for some of the companies that are they're negatively affected by it, like what advice are you giving them? Are they looking at a possible pivot? Are they looking at just different sales channels? Like, which direction are they kind of going right now, out of the examples that you've seen so far?
Really depends. So I'll give a couple of examples. So one, it's just a different, you're going to pivot on the customer.
Yeah.
So if you were selling to a corporate buyer, thinking that, this is a service that is, it's not really one that's transferable to people working at home. Mm-hmm. Do you just stand still, or do you start trying to approach, more of a direct to consumer model, something like that? On the extreme, I have had one company that has basically said, this is not going to work out anymore. We're going to do something else. And I caught up with them yesterday. The pivot is completely different. It's not even a pivot. It's just a new business. It's a totally new thing, which is totally fine. The team is sticking together, in other words, but the product is completely different. And I think I actually might like their chances with this new one more than I did with the previous one. So sometimes that happens. I've seen that happen maybe 4 or 5 times over the last few years in the incubator, where a team applies with something, it goes so-so, mm-hmm. Eventually doesn't work out, they shut it down, but the same group largely starts working on something else, and it's that next thing that works a little better. So in some cases, I think, when you're talking about impact of COVID-19, in some cases, this can force the decision sooner than it would have happened otherwise. Yeah. I could imagine this company I'm thinking about, kind of, shuffling along for another year, and it's an okay business. It's not great. And then eventually saying, not for us. But when you have a very sudden impact, something like COVID-19, it forces those decisions a little earlier on. It either forces a decision of, okay, we can adjust and actually maybe things are going to work a little better.
Yeah.
We can adjust and we can keep things kind of going. Or, we should just stop now.
Yeah.
Let's do something else. It's not it's not worth our time to try to continue to pursue this original concept. So, so to some degree, mostly talking about early stage businesses here, to some degree, because, if you have that flexibility, if you're not under a lot of pressure from, financial pressure from, an investor, you might actually have a little more flexibility to just go in a different direction. And I try to just keep a positive outlook for these businesses. So,
I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing though with them. Like, I don't know, from my perspective, I felt like there were a lot of zombie startups kind of in the ecosystem and not just startups. I mean, we can look at the corporate landscape as well as someone like Sears or any of the other large corporates that are kind of just like trudging along, that keep getting cheap debt, that are just kind of hanging out there, but haven't been forced to make that kind of tough decision. But I think in the long run, it'll end up helping out the ecosystem, because all of those zombie companies were holding great talent that couldn't be repositioned into ideas that would end up working. And so it might be short-term loss. I mean, it absolutely will, and it's tough. I mean, I think the unemployment rate today is like 25 million or something already, which is just nuts. But long-term, it could turn out for a positive going forward.
Right.
So what's I guess another interesting question then. So as we kind of look forward towards the future, a post-apocalypse, how do you see, and this is totally kind of a left field question, like, what are your thoughts on how maybe consumer behavior changes, or how the world might look slightly differently going forward? I'll give you an example. Like, I've been an Equinox member for 7 years, going to the gym. Can't go to the gym now. I literally found a manufacturer in China, and I'm literally having gym equipment bought there, imported to here. I won't be a gym member anymore. But like, what other examples might you see on shifting consumer behavior? Is it a move from like how we work, in that like, oh, working remotely isn't awful. We can actually still get stuff done and save people a lot of time and energy. What are your thoughts around it?
Yeah. High level.
Yeah. Super high level.
I at least think there's opportunities in, say, speaking domestic US, in return of growth in manufacturing, or at least very hard consideration of places that should be growing, like sectors that should return for like domestic production.
Yeah.
Whether you categorize the areas by like their healthcare related equipment, like the issues with like mask production or other PPE, or pharma, production. So I think there's going to be a hard look at that, maybe even to the point where I get why over the decades, for cost reasons or just for like overall manufacturing ecosystem reasons, a lot of production moved out of the US. But then, a sudden pandemic, which is not the kind of thing that only happens once in the history of the world. It's something that happens, again and again. Yeah. I think it's forced the issue now, and maybe we'll see a way of, encouraging some of that production to come back, and beyond, like just this one, say, year of the COVID, pandemic. That might be one thing. Another is, a lot of people are discovering it's okay working from home. It's okay. Obviously depends on how big your house is or your apartment. Obviously depends on how many people are in there and their ages. Certainly depends on like the weather that you have in the location. But whereas, something I would like to see anyway is that these smaller locations around the country, around the world, that formerly were left behind as people started going more towards the cities and like the talent started centering around the big urban areas. I would like to see some smaller locations, which are great places to live, or if you have kids, great places for them to grow up.
Yeah.
Have it be possible for you to work from home.
Yeah.
And maybe you can, you spend some number of weeks per year in an office environment and you travel for that, and the rest of the time you can work remote. The tech is there to enable it. It's really the like the social, behavioral, or just cultural side that was not there. I'm interested to see the long-term just health practices, behavioral types of things, and how long they stay. So if you look back, 100 years ago, 1918 flu, people were wearing masks back at the time, and then they stopped pretty soon after that. They went right back towards, big, gatherings and, handshakes and hugs and kisses, like, didn't go away. So I'm always a little skeptical that a pandemic can completely remove that physical contact that humans have been doing for a long time. It might make you a little more careful, or it might make you just more sensitive to when someone sneezes. And I already was doing that like in January. It's like, I'm just bumping elbows. I'm not going to shake your hand. Or in general, I would be sensitive to that because I have a lot of students, and people would come into my office a year ago and sneezing. I'd be like, okay, I'm washing my hands after. I'm gonna try to protect my health here a bit. You see 50 people every day. The viral load builds up. I would love to see that ability to keep working from home for more people, and allow people to pursue living in a different location. Thoughts around manufacturing, or even just thoughts around how you might monitor something, like the next time that something like this is going to pop up. Nobody's really handled this very well, around the world. It's not like you say there's one place, one person who had it all figured out, and like everybody else, messed up. It's really combination of bad systems or systems that worked really well for the previous environment now breaking down. I certainly would like to, if I can, be involved, or through the incubator or through like just other people who I talk to, have some involvement with lessening the blow for people who have lost their jobs, or who are like needing to think about the next thing because they know, it's maybe a matter of time before their company has to do a round of layoffs. Finding the next range of positions or careers or types of work for people affected. If I can be of help, there, even if it's just like connecting people, I'd like to help with that.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah. And, we always appreciate stuff like that. I definitely agree with you about the supply chain piece. I feel like it really, really broke, finely tuned, stretched, I guess, to the max supply chains. It took them down hard, like really quickly too. Like it didn't take a lot to totally sink the entire supply chain. So I do see, I 100% agree with you. I see a lot of it coming back, even if it is a little bit more expensive. It's like, okay, well, if the next time that this happens, like, I mean, it could have taken down some companies on this one. So
I'll throw in my kind of like a tangential connection for this discussion. It's not specifically related to health or COVID-19. I won't be surprised if, the way that people look at risk will change. So like one of the things I'm actually bearish about for the last couple of years, I've written about, is AVs, autonomous vehicles.
Yeah.
And I'm actually wondering that this big impact from COVID-19 and like the systemic risk that it exposed in something like supply chains, et cetera, you optimize the supply chain for that perfection of like, there's no delay in delivering, each of the components, and the assembly takes place and you ship it on to the customer, and you have a disruption, and then there's a big impact. So I'm wondering if people are going to then reevaluate the that cost benefit assessment of autonomous vehicles. In other words, the benefit of autonomous vehicles is, you can put more cars on the road, closer together, so you eliminate traffic jams, or you don't rely on drivers not being available in the middle of the night, or you can have all these different scenarios that take place. You can gather data, but you also have a system that is really reliant on not being hacked, not being aimed in some other way. And if you can impact it, you can impact an entire fleet or an entire city, or an entire nation. So I wonder if people are going to take a closer look to these potential deployments and say, okay, there's actually a risk here of a big breakage. Yeah. And those little benefits of optimization are going to be wiped out in a day if it does break down. Yeah. So that's my kind of tangential, left field example that, what might happen later on.
That is interesting. It is going to shape the way that we think. And honestly, I'm super interested to watch how it kind of plays out and goes going forward. Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's go back to maybe a little bit more focused on entrepreneurship rather than just the current crisis. Let's talk about some of the problems that founders face. So there are a lot of them traditionally, but what are some of the biggest maybe mistakes that you see founders make early on?
Off the top of my head, I mean, there's a lot, right?
Yeah.
Staying really wedded to the first idea, not being willing to change, even when you're collecting a lot of data that says you're on the wrong track. Not taking care of the team dynamics, or even just the, what I'll call like, just the regular, like legal paperwork of making sure that the team is, one of the things I ended up, after starting the program at USC, one of the things I ended up requiring that new founders who I work with, do, or new teams that I work with do, is that they have a founder agreement in place. So, in other words,
what's involved in your founder agreement?
So I don't write it for them. You just need to have one. I'm not like legally reviewing this. You need to have this discussion. In other words, there's a lot of kind of templates that you can modify, or you could have, if you want, you could have a lawyer do this for you, but there's a lot of like boilerplate that you can use as a starting point. The important thing is you've had this discussion on the team. Who is doing what? If there's an equity split, how is that happening? What is vesting? What happens if someone needs to quit for some reason, or is pushed out for some reason, or is fired because of cause or other reasons? Rather than have nothing and then it's total chaos if the team falls apart, which is a common thing. Teams falling apart or somebody having a problem, it's about a third of early stage teams statistically. Yeah. So if you can take one of these big problems off the table, you've just increased your success rate.
Yeah.
you either like identify early on, oh wow, like I thought I had 90% and you had 10% and you thought you had 90%, I had 10%. Like at least have this discussion so you don't have, and that happens, right? So you don't have, a year later, something like that.
Oh God.
Which happens. Or you don't have a rogue founder who, like, someone quits and then it's uncertain, like, do they actually own anything here? I'm not sure. So that's a pretty common mistake, that, hey, we're all best friends, it's a handshake, don't worry about it, we'll deal with that later on. Early stage teams fall apart at a pretty high rate, so just try to take that risk off the table. But that and went into the first idea. Diving
back into that, do you force them to start looking at because you start dealing with a lot of teams, do you force them to start looking at more of a hierarchy look within the actual organization, or is it still kind of flat? Like, do you end up walking them through, or do they even see like, hey, okay, is the CEO, does he have the ability, like who has the ability to fire whoever? Like, do they start setting those principles then, or is it more kind of as they walk through, or it's maybe not a tough conversation that they want to have yet?
No one likes having the conversation because it's very uncomfortable, very awkward. I don't really walk them through at any great detail, because in general, the teams that I see, at least when they apply, it's 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, and there's probably not much of a hierarchy. Later on, like, we've had a number of companies that, now they have 10, 20, people on the team as they grow. A little different story, but in general, I'll put it to you this way: if I had a lot of resources and I had a staff, and who could, like, somebody who just do this one thing, I'd probably go in more detail. Right now, I'm battling against, okay, the default is you are going to do nothing, probably. So I just need you to do a little something, and that reduces the failure rates significantly. I've actually had this discussion with friends of mine who are lawyers and very smart, and they are correct. Yeah, you should do a much more thorough, back and forth here. But I'm battling against, like, nothing happens rather than, I'm not going to be able to, like, assign a lawyer to do nothing but, review of contracts for the 30 companies a year that we bring in. Yeah. So it's it's a little bit of trying to address what I can with the resources that we have. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, to your question, the things I like to focus on also are just like shortening cycle times for companies. So that might mean shortening the discovery cycle time. In other words, like, you came in, you applied with this, this really early stage business with a handful of beta customers, and you still really need to understand, like, who your target customers are. Mm-hmm. Let's help you. That's like guidance, training, introductions to help shorten that cycle time. Same on, like, other operational issues. So a lot of the other resources that we bring in the incubator, we bring a number of mentors or advisors in throughout the year, throughout the semesters. So that's everything from, like, legal office hours, accounting office hours, marketing, branding, pricing, specific, experts, people who do nothing but run paid ad campaigns, or who do nothing but, like, A/B test your mailing list, or different versions of your website. So look at one of the things I like to look at is, like, how do we augment the small teams that you have, give you access to these other resources. It doesn't really make sense for you to hire a person who does nothing but marketing at this early stage, or somebody who, or you're not going to hire, like, an in-house lawyer, right? But you need help, a certain number of hours a month, and we can get you at least part of the way there. At some point, you might need to engage someone, or at some point you might need to say, okay, we need to learn more about this one topic. At least we've identified the big risk areas through these discussions, and we can decide what are we going to start with first. And then otherwise, this program, as it has emerged over the years, it's a little different because every program is a little different, but a combination of being, half alumni and a really broad range of founder backgrounds, how many years of work experience, people have. As a result, it's really a founder-driven program. So 5 years ago when the program was brand new and everyone was a current student, it was almost like it was a class. Week one is, module one, and we all kind of step through, and this week two is module two, and we all kind of are stepping through together. Yeah. That didn't really make sense after the first year, when it became a much broader, mix of, backgrounds, experience levels, types of companies. So it's largely a founder-driven program, by which I mean there's a number of things that are a fit for everyone, and we'll do some things in a group. And now we're doing that virtually, of course. But there's also a number of things that, if it's some specific mentors who I bring in, it might only make sense to have them meet one or two of the companies, because that's where the need is, or that's like the industry, intersect. Same on the investor side. Most of the companies that I have coming in, they're not thinking about raising money like right now. No. They might be in a few months. They might be like bootstrapping their way for a while, and then later on they consider, raising money. So I don't really make everyone kind of go through, the same process of pitching to an investor. If you're not going to do that just yet, maybe your time is better spent on something else. Try to make some of the connections, because, just getting to know more people is beneficial. But I used to, in my other programs where, they were funded programs and we ended with demo days, that was more of a common theme. Everyone is going to practice their pitch every week, and we're getting ready to, for the demo day. That's less of a focus now, or I only use that where the companies are actually pursuing, fundraising. So, I don't know. Those are some of the differences.
Yeah. What about so then jumping back into talking a little bit more about VC then. So when the entrepreneurs are ready to start looking at raising capital, like how are you advising them on that process? Are they looking like what type of VC should they be looking for? What should they look for in a VC?
I mean, everyone's a little different because the companies are all different, but some of the generalities are, they're probably like the normal things that anybody would say, which is, you're building a relationship with someone. This is not a one-off transaction. So you probably want to get to know someone over time. And that's both so like you can discover if this is an investor who you want to work with long-term. Do they identify with the vision that you have? Are they excited about the problem that you're solving? And, they are giving good guidance. Maybe they have portfolio investments who kind of demonstrate the ways that they think about, working with, early stage companies. Maybe they demonstrate just some of their own knowledge or network that is beneficial to you, specifically. So, I think that's probably like, a general mix of ways that you might think through it. Mm-hmm. It's, you and I were talking about this like a little while ago when you were visiting classes, where it's not really the situation of, only the investor asks the questions and the startup founders, just answer. And it's like you pass a test and then you check enough boxes and then, okay, here is the money. You won the comp. Is this a person or a firm who you value the guidance that they're going to give, you value the way that they seem to work with their other portfolio investments. So I typically will recommend that the founders just get to know some of the other portfolio companies in any firm that they might be pitching or want to pitch. Understand a little bit about what is it actually like working with this VC. What types of guidance, what type of help in network and opening doors to customers, to follow-on rounds, to to hiring talent. They able to benefit from rise to the top. So great that I saw, going back to one of your first questions about the smaller tech locations. I would actually see in the small locations that it was possible for investors who were not really great, but they would still, they could survive. They had deal flow. They were able to be the place that you would go because there weren't many options. Now, what we saw over the last few years is there were more and more options of places to go to raise capital. So another interesting, twist to intersect it back with coronavirus is, as people maybe become a little more careful on how they invest, does that start to change again? Do some startups become a little needier? If they were burning too much cash, if they were expecting that the world is not going to change, or that next round is easy to raise in the near term, that's kind of changed. Are some startups going to be forced into bad relationships with investors, which I hope doesn't happen?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a possibility. 100%. I mean, it's your desperate times call for desperate measures, and so there will absolutely be more predatory investors that are out there. Just kind of the way that cycles end up working, because they know the startups are a little more desperate, and it's okay, either you take capital from me or your business fails, and so you're going to agree to my terms because you don't have a choice anymore. Yep. Which is tough, definitely. But the founders don't forget, and a lot of times the ecosystem doesn't either. So all these founder-friendly firms, I mean, you'll see how it plays out. If they're going to pull a term sheets, or what actually is going to end up happening. So I mean, it'll be a long-term problem for them if that ends up happening. So final kind of question, because I would assume you have some great ones. What are some of the best resources for entrepreneurs?
Oh, best resources. There's a lot. Spark XYZ. Actually, no, you've written a lot of good posts. I recommend them to people. It's true. I'm not saying it because you're interviewing me. It's true.
We just had that as a highlight from one of the shows.
So, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of content out there, but you've written great stuff. Y Combinator has a lot of great stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Or even just looking at their list of documents, examples of term sheets, et cetera. I guess I would also say, because each startup is a little different, you probably want to find just some of the experienced, leaders in your industry, your sector, whether they are other founders, whether they're investors, and just kind of dive into some of their data. But otherwise, newsletters like Stratechery, The Information, those are solid, and enough coverage of different companies, pretty broadly, that you might be able to just do some company or industry research that's helpful. Otherwise, my go-to is don't make your default reading or content consumption be general tech news.
Yeah.
Focus more on whoever your customer is. Like, what are they reading, right? Like, how do I understand them more deeply? So, and those are all the publications that, like, we're probably not talking about, because it's a little different for everyone.
Yeah.
That's probably my go-to. Like, you get enough from just being on Twitter, probably headlines of what's going on. I need a couple of good newsletters, like and yours, of course. But otherwise, start digging into your own customers' publications or like industry publications, because that's where the knowledge gets a little deeper.
Yeah, no, definitely great advice. Well, Paul, appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you again, and look forward to catching up soon.
Thanks, Lucas.